وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
ما شاء الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. فمن يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. ثم أما بعد.
Sorry, I do it. That was stupid. Yeah. Oh, it's not.
لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. The struggle continues. But
Listen, I'm only on one, and I can only imagine what that's going to look like.
Allahu Akbar. So I have the distinct honor of introducing Dr. Teseem Alkeik, mashallah, who is joining us from Philly, right?
That's right.
Mashallah. And how was the family?
Everyone's doing good, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. How is my brother, Mu'ad?
You know him. He's doing great. Always sends his salams over.
Please return the salam for me. Or as I like to refer to him, the secret shareholder at Tim Hortons.
Oh, I got to know this story. What happened there?
No, when he was at ALIM, every time I saw him, he would say, "Want to go to Tim Hortons? Let's hit up Tim. Let's hit up Tim Hortons. Let's hit up Tim Hortons." So I said, "What?" I said, "You own stock in Tim Hortons or something like that?" But every time I see you, the only thing you want to do is hit up Tim Hortons, man.
Listen, it's a Midwest thing. We grew up with Tim Hortons right beside us. We had nothing else, so
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. So thank you for joining me this evening. This is a really hard time to talk about anything other than Gaza, right? I think that this conflict, to call it a conflict, right? This genocide, this exercise in ethnic cleansing is well into its 38th, 39th day. And I understand that some people feel like there's really nothing else worthy of being discussed. However, we're trying to, continue cultivating deeper levels of understanding of our faith. We're trying to, not carry on in a way that denies the disquieting, disturbing nature of what's happening. But, we still want to make sure that we are deepening our commitment to Islam, deepening our understanding of Islam, in spite of, a part of us that, is certainly, consumed with what's happening in Gaza.
Can I say something, Sheikh, about that? I always think, subhanAllah, these types of, again, it's not an event here, but as you mentioned, a genocide, these extremely disturbing circumstances, I think puts a topic like this into perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about this all the time. Just a few months ago, I was wrestling with, a certain topic related to whatever, gender and Islamic law. And I was going back and forth, digging through sources, trying to find an answer. And it was really getting to me in a way that, whatever, I just like to read and find answers. But subhanAllah, and then this stuff puts it into perspective. Like death puts into perspective, war, oppression puts into perspective. Like at the end of the day, yes, there are challenges when we think about like how we want to understand Islamic law, but at the end of the day, it's just like it's very black and white. We're here for a purpose, and it's all going to end. And really, I think that's it might not matter at that point.
No, mashallah. You have a gift of turning a phrase, and that's what I was looking for. Of course, the topic for this evening is, reading misogyny into, Islamic scripture, into Islamic law, into our interpretive exercise of Islam. And part of me kind of just, guilt is the wrong word, but part of me kind of felt like we had proposed this topic, at the beginning of the month. We knew that we wanted to interview, we wanted to converse with you, but I do have this feeling like, like this that issue of perspective, like, these matters are important too, but we know that as a global community, we're dealing with other issues that also demand our attention and focus. But I want to give this conversation its haq. I want to give this conversation its right. Why don't you start by telling me why and how this became a research interest of yours?
So I actually want to selfishly admit that I wanted to talk about this topic with you because I wanted to pick your brain. So I was like, oh, this is great.
Oh, bismillah.
Yeah, I'll share some ideas. Let's see what he says. So I'm excited. But I mean, in many ways, I pursued a PhD because I had these questions. I think that's very natural, not necessarily just because, in fact, like undergrad, I did early Christianity. It was very interesting comparative religion. But it's almost inevitable. Like you can't avoid it. When I went into my PhD, I wanted those questions answered, but I told myself, I'm not going to be the female that's going to go do her PhD in Islamic studies and do it on gender. Like it's just, that's it. Everyone does that. I'm going to do something on like, I was actually really interested in Al-Qayyim and doing something with like custom in Islamic law, but it comes after you in many ways than others. So I'd taken a course with Jonathan Brown at Georgetown, and basically we were looking at like fatawa, Maliki fatawa. So great reason to pick your brain. And basically we're just talking about court cases where women would go to judges and complain about their husbands or whatever case they had. And it was really interesting to see how the fatwas were issued, where, especially with Malikis, they're very concerned about harm to a woman in marriage. And they really went out of their way to ensure that a woman could leave her marriage if she was harmed. And they defined harm in so many different ways, and not just physical, right? And that was incredible. And to me, I couldn't let that pass. I needed to know more about what Malikis had said about it. So I went down that path. And of course, just naturally in academia, studying anything with gender, it's, how do I put this? It's like a
charged.
It's charged. Yeah, exactly. It's a minefield, right? Everything is very cynical, gender aside, but I think everything in academia, people always ask me like, Teseem, I'm really thinking of doing a PhD, and I tell them like, stop. Why do you want to do a PhD? Why do you want to pursue academia? Like, depends on what you're going for, because a lot of times people just want sort of, traditional studies and they want to grow in their faith or whatever. And I always remind them, go ahead for academia, but just know that it's not the space where you're going to grow spiritually by any means.
Yes.
Like, especially when talking about law, talking about gender, it's going to be a minefield. It's very charged. And everything assumes really that the tradition is misogynistic, scripture is misogynistic, hadith, all of that, right? There's almost like a baseline, like unstated and most often a very clearly stated assumption that that's the case. And so as a woman, you're reading it and you're thinking to yourself like, okay, well, why do I want any part of this, right? So it's a lot of self-questioning, a lot of self-reflection as to, well, if these are the assumptions at play here, things aren't adding up, and now I have to make a decision. How do I approach these texts? How do I understand them? Because it can be tough, and I can provide examples. I've been collecting a few up my sleeve, and I wanted you to add to that.
Bismillah. No, I intended this to be kind of a bi-directional exchange. I didn't think that I would just have you in front of the firing squad. I know, you're Dr. Tasneem, you're gonna shoot back. But then again, why are we using such violent analogies? We want to just have a conversation and hopefully enrich our collective perspective. Inshallah. So yeah, it is a big topic. I think that many people are cautious about the topic because we're living in a time of, I would say, the elevation of grievance and critique to almost, it's more than method. It's almost become like aqidah. Right? It's become, grievance and critique have become their own kind of legitimacy. And the thing that this always, I guess, leaves me questioning, and of course, I mean, I belong to subaltern groups myself. I'm Black. I'm a descendant of enslaved Americans. I grew up in Chicago's inner city. Grew up in a single parent household. I've experienced some of the systemic inequalities that, mashallah, many talented and passionate activists are becoming more vocal. They're becoming more, their critiques are becoming more trenchant. All of this is appreciable. I think for a Muslim, the question of what is the ideal against which, what is the ideal against which we are forming these critiques? When we say that this leaves something to be desired in terms of equity or justice, the question that always presents itself to me resoundingly is, compared to what? Right?
That's a great question.
Right? This is inequitable compared to what?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think you have to ask that question. And what you find is, or what I've found, is that some of what's motivating this critique is this often undefined, unarticulated kind of post-enlightenment idealism. Like, the world is supposed to be this equity paradise where all categories of people enjoy equal respect, equal access, equal esteem, equal. And I think against that ideal, any system, any tradition that has been lived and embodied by human beings that have lived in different historical contexts, different, cultural sensibilities, etc., can probably be critiqued in many ways. It should not strike anyone as a surprise that is also the case with Islamic tradition.
Absolutely. I mean, it's funny because I'm just thinking to the example of harm, right? And this, I didn't want to go down this route.
Let's
go. Let's go. I mean, it's that compared to what I think is such a good way to put it, right? Because if you keep digging, you recognize that the standard that we have is, there is a whole sort of underpinning, right? A whole ideology as to what that standard should look like. And when you look at what that looks like, whether it's liberalism, whether it's, certain types of feminism, you name it, and you take the principles to the logical conclusions, you can see like, oh, wait, where's this taking me? And this is conflicting with some of the core principles that I have as a Muslim, right? And so I think that's really important, because a lot of times when we're challenging or we're cynical of whatever, a quote tradition of something from scripture, it's almost always under the impression that this is like some unbiased claim that like I woke up one morning and this came to my intuition, but rather recognizing, no, these are actually formed very intentionally by, our society. And so I think it's just really coming to recognize like, what are the forces that are helping shape my questions, my thinking, because no one is thinking in a bubble. But like, just to go back to the example of harm, I think it's so interesting, because I give this example often. I'm going to give you two scenarios here, right? I'm going to give you a scenario. Let me see if I can get the date right. It's, I think about the 12th century, if I'm correct, 1172. I'll double check afterwards. But you have a woman in Portugal. She goes and complains to the judge and says that my husband beat me. I want out. Judge says, out. Take your money, go, right? And then you look at another case in 1876, about like 700 years later, and a woman in the British Empire goes to the court and says the same thing. She got beat so bad. She has permanent injuries. The court's like, we're not even going to listen to your case. Go home. And I've always liked to give that example, like sort of details missing, because the first example in, the 11th century, I believe it's 11th century, 1096. Anyways, the number will come to me. That's a Muslim going to none other than Ibn Rushd, right? Al-Jad, Maliki jurist. And Malikis were very openly clear about that. There's a tafriq al-darar, that you get out of your marriage if there's harm, right? And then it wasn't until for common law, I mean, in the United States, it was just a few decades ago where they even thought of okay, well, harm can be something beyond physical. And it was just even a few decades before that where you could even take your husband to court. So I think that thinking about what has Islamic law offered when you look at it sort of holistically, it's something it's extremely impressive. This is not romantic, I'm looking back. No, this is a huge deal compared to what we would see as a post-enlightened world and the values that they have. Not to say that Islamic law now is perfect and that it doesn't have it's in its application, at least doesn't have its hiccups. But I think that knowing that perspective and then recognizing, okay, what am I working with here? It's because we've been raised to only see this pretty, pursuit of equality with none of its baggage. It's almost the assumption that this is the ideal. It's always been the ideal. This is the end goal. When you don't recognize the history that it's come with, and when you take these principles to their extreme, what that's going to leave us with.
Yeah, and also too, I think one of the most important things I've learned when reading the tradition is you have to really struggle at times to understand the context in which these rulings are being authored. The context in which these fatwa are being issued, because sometimes you'll find that there are core elements of their societal context that are just so different than our own. And if you can't see that, some of the interpretive calculus that is there, you'll miss it, right? You'll miss it. So I remember studying Dusuqi, which is a book of Maliki law that we studied at Azhar, and he just references Dardir in passing, saying that a woman needs to have a wali. La nikah bidun al wali. It was a clear hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that there's no marriage without a woman having a male guardian, right, a guarantor. He said, but this condition can be relaxed if a woman was formerly enslaved, or this, or black, right? Or black. If she's black in complexion, this condition of a male guarantor can be relaxed. And I remember thinking to myself, subhanallah, this seems to suggest that this institution of wilayah that is supposed to provide protection to women and solemnize their marriages can be relaxed if the woman is black, because there is a kind of there is something undesirable about being black, right? And I was very disappointed with this. I was troubled. I was literally troubled by this. And when I started to kind of unpack this ruling, one of my teachers said to me, well, you have to understand, with the faqih, with somebody that is engaging in positive law, not everything they do is prescriptive. A lot of what they're doing is descriptive, right? So he gave the example of me, for instance, right, in Chicago, right? He didn't give this example, but I'll contemporize this example just for the sake of illustration. He said, What if you said, we've been seeing too many fly-by-night marriages, men that are not serious, that don't intend our women well, and we are not doing any religious marriages unless there's an accompanying, unless there's a civil ceremony that's also done in some county in Illinois. If you don't have a civil marriage license, we will not do your nikah at this masjid, and we have to do this to protect our sisters. And then I said, but we can relax that if it's somebody Venezuelan or somebody Mexican, then don't worry about it. Somebody reading this 800 years from now could think that I saw something undesirable about being Venezuelan or undesirable about being Mexican, when I was just reacting to the reality on the ground that many of them were in fact undocumented. Many of them were in point of fact incapable of going and acquiring a state marriage license. Like, they could not do that. And as someone trying to do positive law for a community that includes members that maybe have some of these limitations, I have a responsibility to address their reality, even if their reality is less than ideal, right? In an ideal circumstance, we can all go and get state marriage licenses because all Muslim women deserve this protection if we deem it a protection. But in reality, this was a migrant community that was undocumented, and we had to adjust things for this community. And I was like, wow, that's really brilliant. That I just wouldn't be able to see that. Right?
Yeah, no, that's a phenomenal example. Because that requires a step that might be a little further for most people, and really this journey, this journey requires patience, because for many people they might not get to that end step. So it's recognizing that, listen, every case is going to look a little different. You might not know the answer, but recognizing that there are these types of circumstances. I can give even easier examples, right? There's the famous hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that essentially a woman can take on the shape of shaitan, right? The guise of shaitan. And so if you see a woman and you're attracted to her, go to your family, go to your wife. And the problem is, there's no problem with the hadith. I think it's the way that it was told as I was growing up, was like, women, of course, you're like devils, right? And so,
the ropes of shaitan, right?
Yeah. And you've heard it, right? I've definitely heard that. Anytime you go step out of line, it's just like, don't you forget, it's because you're the devil. So I think there's a problem there. Obviously, there's a problem with the way things are communicated and relayed. But if you actually think about the hadith itself, I was ironic because I was recently reading another famous hadith that shaitan flows in a person's body, like blood, right? Blood, right? Najib them. And I just think to myself, these are the types of examples that I've been so interested in. Because I would not read this hadith and think to myself, wow, look at those men, like they've got the blood of shaitan like flowing through them, right? You don't think that way because we've been trained to have a hermeneutics of suspicion, right? You're always assuming that whatever's going to be said about women, there's going to be some tinge of patriarchy or misogyny or something to doubt, right? I read that hadith on my own and say, okay, women are fitna, women are devils. Why in the world am I interested in this hadith corpus? Why should I listen to this? You realize it's like, well, no, I'm taking my baggage to it, right? I'm taking assumptions that I'm inferior and this and that, but I'm not going to read hadith like that, right? And now I'm just collecting examples because this is interesting to me, right?
No, you make a very, see, whenever you talk about hermeneutics, it is nearly impossible to kind of dislodge the subjectivity of the person reading a text. So the example you gave was brilliant, right? Inna shaytana yajri fikum majra dam. Shaitan, he's speaking to a group of men, right? Shaitan flows, and the hadith was actually about husn al-dhan. Look at the poetry in this, right? The hadith was about having a good opinion. And the Prophet says, because shaitan flows in you like blood. But when we see men, we don't think they have the blood of Satan flowing in them. That doesn't, it's almost like there is this extra textual hurma, respect that we have for men that would prevent us from ever interpreting that hadith in a way that is demeaning to them. The hadith is taken as the Prophet ﷺ talking about, kind of a supersensory spiritual reality and warning these men about forming evil opinions about their brothers using powerful and descriptive language. But at no point does it become a part of a normative understanding of some decrepitude, some undesirable quality that is inherent to masculinity. It never happens like that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Even like another example, it's a famous example that the Prophet ﷺ says, I have not left a fitna greater than women. Like I'm not leaving anything behind, like this fitna, right? And I remember I actually captured this quote. I had to take it down. I was reading a book. It's an academic book on Aisha radiallahu anha. And the author was going off to say that, like, yes, that women are in Islamic law and Islamic tradition are perceived as this fitna. They are like epitomized evil, whereas men are good. And like she's going off all these metaphors as to how like women are always depicted as like blackness and women and men as like the light. And it was so like hyperbolic that I stopped for a second. I thought to myself, okay, this is interesting. Without any context, I mean, yeah, I've been told you're a fitna, right? So again, that plays a part in it. It's not the hermeneutic of suspicion. Like when I'm being told by the academy, or I'm told by certain people within whatever space I'm in, hey, Islamic law says this about you as a woman. That's only going to be amplified because of certain negative experiences that I might have had with within my community. So I might be reading this hadith and think to myself, like, again, I want out. Like, what is this?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking when I came across the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he said, essentially is warning men and women that al-hamu al-maut, that the brother-in-law, the male-in-laws, are not a fitna. They're not just a trial.
Death.
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 It's incredible. Have you ever read that hadith and thought to yourself, wow, the Prophet, peace be upon him, I mean, men are really just terrible people. They just cause death, and they're just this evil in this world. And
no. Yeah, you would never see it that way. You would never see it that way. Because you would not read that kind of meaning into speech. And even though this is a way of potentially oversimplifying a very complicated issue, it really, in my estimation, comes down to trust. It really comes down to trust. If I trust that the voice speaking to me is one that honors me, elevates me, I would probably be prepared to morally enrich anything I heard from that voice. If I trust that voice, if I trust that, even if that voice issues me a very strong moral challenge, right? Even if that voice, speaks to me in, a language of strong condemnation is too strong a word, but, moral challenge, I would still morally enrich that khitab, that address. But if, on the other hand, I believe that this is a voice that devalues me, this is a source of authority that does not esteem me, but in fact demeans me, then I would probably interpret what I read through that lens.
I mean, precisely. And the problem is, at least in my experience, the moment you open your eyes, you're often being told from, the world that we live in, that you are devalued, and your experiences are, sort of affirming that experience. And then you go to text, and now you sort of take it out all on the text, and it really just is a slippery slope from there.
Well, I mean, I guess my question is, how does one get out of that, right? How does one get out of that? Because it appears to me that if you're in that place, the only thing that distinguishes speech that I can trust, intends to elevate, enrich, esteem, respect, enhance from speech that seeks to devalue, demote, demean, disrespect, is power. It ends up a question of power, right? It ends up a question of power. I was thinking about how every African American knows, every Black person knows that whenever you see a movie or you read a book and Black people are depicted as like, closer to nature, they have this kind of magic intelligence that, mother's wit, characters like Bubba Gump and the Magic Negro, right? Someone that is kind of, unbothered by sophistication and this, they kind of live in this magical space. When you hear that, this is not a compliment. And I think women often experience something similar. We talk about women and their emotions, and women and their, kind of the spiritual, etc. of women. I often see a parallel there, that because there's an imbalance in power, is it like, I guess what I'm trying to say is, I feel it's like, is it inherently wrong for someone to not have a formal education but have very profound ideas? No, right? That isn't inherently wrong. But when you feel like this is somehow a trope that is being invoked to suggest, you begin to feel like, wait, what are we talking about here? It's almost like talking about, Black athletic prowess. It's like, there's nothing inherently wrong with, oh, wait 1 second. Oh, there's nothing inherently wrong with being a very capable athlete. But when this is connected to excluding me from other kinds of self-actualization, that doesn't feel good. And so I think many times, even in the tradition, when homage is paid to women, it's often in ways that women perceive as kind of these backhanded compliments. Oh, well, it's kind of like there's a heightened emotional intelligence, but there's a nux in another kind of intelligence, right? Or there's a heightened kind of sensibility of rahma and et cetera, but and so I guess I'm just perplexed as to how do we negotiate that relationship that has very real implications in terms of power, if that makes any sense.
I think there's a lot of different angles that I could get at. I'm going to give a hot take.
Okay.
I feel like this past year I've learned a lot, just working with different communities, meeting a lot of new people.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll give the example of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, a woman is like the rib, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I in all of my circles growing up, this was a hadith that you just don't mention. It's not going to resonate with a lot of women. And, you fall back on the whole, like, oh, well, women are more empathetic. And so they're just treat them well. And for me, that was always that response, not the hadith itself, but the response was always very frustrating. Like, okay, just stop trying to brush aside this conversation and making this seem, more empathetic and rahma. Yeah, I've heard it before. I got it. And, subhanAllah, I have two admissions here. Number one is that the more communities I've worked with, interacted with, I can see how true, like the hadith itself, like if the wisdom behind the hadith is very simple, right? Listen, just women want to be talked a certain way. Just be smart about it. It's probably the best marriage advice you could give to someone, right?
No doubt. وَعَاشِرُهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ إِنْ
عاشروهن
كَرِهْتُمُوهُنَّ فَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُوا شَيْئًا
ويجعل
وَيَجْعَلَ
الله.
اللَّهُ فِيهِ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا.
Absolutely. And when I've come in recognizing that, right, I'm very thick-skinned, let's put it that way, where I don't see myself as emotional as most women. And so that response always irks me because I took it personally. Like, no, I've met a million more men who are much more, emotional than me. I've met, women who are like me, right? So I've learned to box the two, that, you know what, even if I'm, less emotional than many women or more, I don't know, whatever words, or there are more men that are more emotional than me. Like, to me, for all I know, I could be a blip in history, right? The whole world could be a blip in history in terms of like women today are different, right? And I'm like recognizing that even if every single woman in this world today was less emotional and didn't have those categories applied of the rahman and everything like that, like the Prophet is talking universally across time and space, right? And I'm just starting to sense, I don't know if, I'm trying to age myself here, but I don't know if it comes with wisdom with age, but I'm starting to like just reflect and think to myself, I see the more people I meet, like how vastly different communities are, and start to think that like the Prophet can't speak to everyone across time and space, that like I have to impose my personal experiences.
But see, what I see about that, and that's why I was talking about power. This is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. So the iwaj mentioned in the hadith, the curvature, that these are the terms that we've learned to use, right? I think this hadith is extremely profound, because whenever there's a good book, there's a good article that Renovatio, the Zaytuna academic journal, ran maybe 3 or 4 episodes ago. Episodes, I'm thinking television, editions ago, right? It was written by Eva Brand from St. John's College. And I believe the title was Equal to Whom? Equal to what? That the basic presumption of equality requires someone to be an ideal. Meaning, like we're saying, if you're making the claim that we're equal, the very fact that you're making the claim actually suggests that we're unequal. Because I'm not making the claim that, I'm equal to a woman. I'm not making that claim. A woman is making the claim, right, that we're equal. And that in and of itself can create a situation in which the performance of your equality requires you to do things that deny maybe how you really feel, what you really want. If that makes any sense.
Of course. And وَلَيْسَ الذَّكَرُ كَالْأُنْثَى. It's fascinating with the structure that untha here is sort of like the baseline. A male's not like a female, right?
Exactly. It's kind of like it forces you into places where, like, to show that I'm just like you. Whereas what I've always understood that hadith to mean, and how my teachers traditionally trained men, the expectation is not that she would see things the way that you do, or that she would, her disposition would be like yours. And that the hadith to me was always this suggestion of humility, that don't see yourself as some ideal to which she should be judged, or according to which she should be judged. Rather, this is a different creation. This is a different category of being. And if you want to live harmoniously and peacefully and happily, because that's the end of the hadith, but if you leave that the way that it is, you can actually live a harmonious and peaceful life with her. So I've always understood that to be a command to be humble, not to think, well, she's just like me. I remember, it's interesting. I remember I was reading this photojournalism book, Humans of New York, many years ago. And I don't know how this makes its way into the book, but one guy said, I'm a true feminist. It's New York City. He said, so if there's only one seat on the train and you're a pregnant woman, I'm going for it. Now I thought to myself, what? That's just inconsiderate. Right?
All equal.
I mean, that's just inconsiderate. The idea that you would in some way think that there's moral value to a statement like that, it's mind-blowing. But if the standard is equality, hey, I can stand, you can stand. If that's the standard. So I've always understood that hadith to mean, no, this is, we're certainly, you have verses of the Quran that make very clear, we're certainly equal in spiritual value. That's not, I don't know any traditional scholars that debate that. But in terms of, وَلَيْسَ ذَكْرُ كَالْأُنْثَى, right? In terms of, and I've heard people say, well, is this descriptive? Is this prescriptive? I've done tahqiq. Most people understood this to be a statement of Hannah, the mother of Maryam, but it's being affirmed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So yeah, no, I think these are some of the bigger questions for me, when thinking about this. So for me, it's like, okay, for anyone to believe that their religious tradition denies them dignity is a problem. That's a problem, right? If I believe that my religious tradition,
why stick around?
If I believe that my religious tradition denies me dignity on account of my being a woman, or on account of my being black, or on account of my being disabled, or then we got some serious, bones to pick with tradition. But my question is, what across time, space is universally construed as a denial of dignity? Right? Meaning, I remember one, I guess, to bring this into sharper relief, it's like, Aisha, she was there. She never said this verse in the Quran, this denies me dignity. Or,
no. Wait, sorry, I got to stop you on that, because I love this example, right? Well, there's a quote that if the Prophet of God saw you women, he would have not let you go to masajid. ما أحدث النساء, right? The منعوهن المساجد, right? If, there's a quote from the companions that you women, what have you done after the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him? If he was here, he would not let you go. If I'd love to play this guessing game, right? Throw out the quote, who in the world would have said this? Let's guess which companions. All right, Umar Khattab, first suspect, whatever, right? You go down the list thinking like, of course a man's going to be saying this, that look at you women, we hear it all the time. You should be like XYZ. And then I love bringing it back to the fact that it was Aisha who said it. So it's like, it flips things on its head. Like when you recognize this is not like, this is not a gendered problem. Sorry, I had to interrupt because that example is just so ironic to me.
Yeah, no, and that's what I'm saying. It's not, it's, like I said, man, what constitutes a denial of dignity? And I think that we have to be at least open to the idea that some of the ways that we have constructed dignity or having a dignified existence is coming out of, a different view of the world than that of the book and the Sunnah. I think that that's something that at the very least warrants our attention. I actually appreciated Amina Wadud's hermeneutic tool of using Tawheed, right? The reason I appreciated it is because at the very least, it's a way of trying to understand gender bias and misogyny and patriarchy. Although I think there's a whole other conversation we can have about patriarchy, but I as a scholar, I respect her attempt to root the problematic nature of those institutions in a worldview that is religious and Tawhidic, as opposed to, I think, a lot of the modern and postmodern writers that I encounter. It's just like you're coming out of a whole different perspective. It's like, if we're going to charge writers in the Muslim tradition with, being, subjects of this, virulent patriarchy, then I charge you and your teachers of being subjects to the kufriarchy. You know what I'm saying? This is a different worldview, one that really has the human being at the center, and it's a different view of the world. So I really appreciate that Amina Wadud attempted that, that I think was overlooked for people who really didn't like her work and critiqued her work. The fact that she rooted her critique of patriarchy and Tawheed, I thought was huge.
That example is interesting because I think that you had asked him, like, how do you overcome this? Like, how do you get past it? I don't think there's really any getting past anything. I think it's just like a learning experience. But I do think it really has to have that baseline assumption that, okay, we're working in a Tawhidic worldview. The assumption is that, you're looking at things holistically, right? You're looking at the prophetic legacy, the corpus, the Hadith corpus. You're looking at, whatever, everything that comes with the Islamic tradition holistically, and you recognize, this bigger picture of, okay, what is my purpose? What am I doing here? How have I been dignified in so many different areas? So if I come across something that I feel like, okay, this is problematic to me, if I have, again, that worldview in mind, my immediate assumption is not going to be this hermeneutic of suspicion, but like, okay, well, I understand the bigger picture. And so this is challenging. I don't want to like brush away like all of the really serious, problems that you can find within, some of you can easily cherry pick quotes and find something really problematic with the tradition, right? That's there. But I think overcoming it is recognizing this like Tawhid view that we're working within a bigger picture. And when you have that understanding, these are sort of just like road bumps that take time, take learning, and sometimes you don't have the answer to. Many times you don't have the answer to. But
and the other thing too is I've found this really interesting dynamic that, whenever we're talking about moral precepts, it's very interesting to like think about like, who are we speaking to? Meaning, if we were to think about kind of the hypothetical woman that we're talking about here and her context, what comes to mind? And what I find is that in a lot of the traditional text, even though I don't know how historically accurate this was, women are often envisioned as having primarily domestic roles in society, and like their their domain, so as to speak, it's spoken of as like the home kind of domain. And I find that even some of those, what I find is that some of those things, women can admit that they have utility in the domestic context, right? So if for instance, wanting to receive special consideration for how different you might see things than your husband, and just wanting to be appreciated in that. That's not that bad at home. However, if we're talking about a woman ascending the professional ranks, or running for public office, or conducting business, that same thing that might have some utility in a domestic context becomes a serious hurdle in a public context, where in a domestic context there may be some utility in me being understood to be emotional, for instance, right? If that's something that is appreciated and nurtured. However, as a community leader, that's not something that I want to be seen as. If that
Yes
makes any
and
sense.
no, yes and no, because I would respond saying that, well, no, our community leaders, please give them emotional intelligence, right? So how do you factor that in?
No, I mean, and I guess what I'm saying in the sense that, see, it's almost like, okay, I'll get real. I'll get a little personal here. Give you just an example of what I'm talking about. I was raised by my mother. I was raised by my mother. Single parent household, didn't really have much of a relationship with my father. And my mother was like Superwoman to me. My mother was a chemist by trade, a professional woman, supported our family, would work 60-hour work weeks. She developed printing ink. She developed contact lens, and somehow found a way to cook dinner every night. She attended most of our sporting events all throughout my childhood. So there is no amount of I don't even sometimes it gets me into some, I don't associate incapacity. I don't I've never I don't ever recall my mother complaining. I don't ever recall my mother being, resentful. I never saw it before, right? So I remember when I was in Egypt, and I was studying for an exam, and my wife, Allah yarhamuha, my late wife, she mentioned to me, she said, I have just a kind of a slight headache. And I said, just casual, I said, well, I think the pharmacy is 24 hours if you go down and grab something. And she said, you really would expect me to walk across the street myself to get some Advil or something like that, and you wouldn't offer to do it for me? I said, no, yeah, I'll go do it for you. I'll go do it for you. No problem. But when I came back, she said, I'm surprised that wasn't your first, reaction. And I said, I tend to think of you as very, very capable. That, you if you needed to go and get some, Advil, that, it wouldn't be a problem, that you could do it. And I'll never forget her saying to me, I don't want you to see me as capable. I want you to see me as someone in need of consideration, concern, support, nurture, care. I might want a man that is my colleague to see me as capable. I want him to see me as capable. I don't want you to see me like that. And I mean, even though this is a personal anecdote, I did perceive like a very serious tension in that, kind of like she was, I think what I heard her articulating there was like, how can I say it? I mean, you get what I'm trying to say. You get what I'm trying to say?
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, it's like some stuff works for me in a domestic context. It doesn't work for me in my professional life. It doesn't work for me if that, you know, but in a domestic context, this works for me. So I find there's a lot of stuff in the tradition that it works in the realm that it envisions for women, but doesn't work in other realms.
There's a lot too much to say to that.
Please, but indulge me.
I'm still not. How do I put this? I'm still not sold on like the complete separation of domestic and public, even in the envisionment of sort of just general trends within the Islamic tradition. I think that there's priorities given. I think there's expectations, but yeah, I haven't thought it through entirely yet, and I this is something that I really want to work on. But I think that there's just so many different like examples I can go down. So I'm trying to think of one that works well. You think of like even domestic and public, that doesn't really cut well when you think of sort of realities on the ground of like women working the farms, or even like seamstresses and weavers and all of that. Despite the fact that they're doing it out of their home, it's still engaging within like slightly beyond that, like that clear cut domestic space. I just think there's a like anyways, this is to your point of like how that Islam. I'm assuming you tend here to say that Islamic tradition envisions women to be within the domestic space.
So no, I think like this right here. Okay, I'll put even sharper point on this, right? You're pushing me here, right? You're pushing me. Good. I'll put a bit of a sharper point on this. What I'm saying is that I knew a sister, and she was a professional woman, a working woman, and she was earning very, very well. And her husband was just kind of struggling to get out of the gate, you know, professionally. And even though she was definitely someone that was committed to an evolved kind of view of, you know, gender roles, and, you know, she would say that the fact that he was, you know, the home economist and she was the breadwinner was not anything that she held against him, right? It was not anything that she held against him. It just, this happened to fall within the ambit of her skill set, and that happened to fall within the ambit of his skill set. But he would complain that in terms of, you know, a certain kind of deference and respect, and how can I say this? You know, I guess. Okay, I'll just say it. You know, it was like the dilemma that they were having as a couple is that there was a certain modality of being a woman that certainly helped her in her career. She was, you know, very, very successful. But that modality, that, you know, again, it presented in the guise of equality. It presented in the guise of mutual respect. It did not satisfy her in terms of what she felt from her husband, how she wanted to feel from her husband, and it did not satisfy him in terms of what he wanted to feel from his wife. And I recognize in that this very dualistic kind of existence that many of us have as professionals, that there is a world in which, like, you know, there's a world in which, like, this is all working for me, but there's another world in which some of those traditional views I am still very wedded to those. I'm still very, so even though this was modern woman, a doctor, and there was still a part of her that wanted to feel cared for by her husband in a certain way.
Absolutely. I don't know. I wouldn't deny that either. I think what happens is that when these types of conversations, this example is one of two extremes where there's like extreme success on one and then not so much on the other. But
whoa. He was a good stay-at-home dad. What do you mean not so much on the other? He was
solid. In terms of the resentment that it sounds like that he wanted to be working, is that the assumption?
No. He wanted to be esteemed by his wife in a certain way. That he wasn't, and she wanted to be cared for by her husband in a certain way. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. How does that translate into a couple who is not necessarily like they're both working, they're both sort of equally?
No. So I guess okay. This is what I'm saying. I'm saying that some of the views of the tradition, some of what you will find in reference to women's skills, women's abilities, how men should regard women, how men should treat women, things, and we can go down and we can look at these ahadith. Were things that in one context, she was a woman dedicated to moving, that she did not subscribe to any of that in her professional life. I don't subscribe to that. But in the domestic sphere, she was still very much wedded to some of those ideals of masculinity and femininity. And the problem was the dualism. You see, in the domestic context, I'm still very much wedded to the tradition. I want certain things that are spoken of in the tradition.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if that's the case, I've had so many people come to me. I don't know why. It's like I have a counselor plastered on my forehead or something. But alhamdulillah.
But in the professional context, I don't want those things. I don't want to be seen like that. I don't subscribe to those views. Those views feel demeaning to me, and like they deny me a certain kind of dignity. But in my private life, I actually very much identify with some of those traditional, dare I say, even patriarchal views.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the biggest challenges with Muslim marriages that I've seen, is in the sense that you want a bit of both, right? You want, like, I know a lot of women who want an extremely supportive husband to pay all the bills, but also to be home, clean the house, and vice versa, right? A man that wants it all from a woman in certain expectations that Islamically, legally, she's not required to do, but that he wants it all. So I think that's always been a tension, that you want, sort of the best of both worlds. And I definitely would agree that even that basic, like a simple hadith of like, don't, be smart when you talk to women. They don't want to be talked like how you're going to talk to other men. That's really how I understand the hadith on Al-Awaj. And to me, it's like, you think about it very simply. Yeah, I mean, at home, you don't talk to me like, I'm your friend. I'm your wife, and you talk to me in a certain way, right? So I think that everyone could relate to it. But again, I think the challenge, the bigger challenge for me is more of the way it's being spoken about on a khutbah or on a minbar or whatever it is. That you women, so emotional. So, I'll give you a funny example. It's a bit out of context here, but, I always think of, I've heard this a lot, that, men have the unilateral right to divorce because women are so emotional. And if the right to divorce was in women's hands, it wouldn't end well. And I think the fact that, there's so many books, Ibn Qayyim and Taymiyyah, they have like volumes on this and it's not even them, like Hanafis, like almost every school of law have volumes of books about all the circumstances where a husband screwed up, and when he was angry or sleepy or drunk or whatever it was, and pronounced talaq and regrets it, and it's like crying for help. And I think to myself, like, okay, these are misplaced, I don't know, trauma's the word, whatever, like misplaced assumptions here that like utilizing or condemning a woman for emotion in the sense that, okay, you're irrational, you can't think, and therefore men can when sort of not recognizing that, like, the anger and recklessness or whatever other forms of emotion are emotional in different ways. I think that's what's frustrating, and that's what really blinds us and creates that lens, that gap. So that when
that's another one of those things for me. When I hear that, so like take for instance, we're going into the weeds now. Now, mashallah, I remember sitting with Dr. Mariam Shaybani in Spain, and we were talking about the famous hadith, An-nisa naqisat aqlan wa dina. Right? Women are deficient in their intellects and in their religion. Right? And fast forwarding, at the end of the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, of course, he says, a man will serve one of you an entire lifetime. And if you see one thing that you don't like from him, you will say, Ma wajadtu minka khayran qat. I've never experienced any good from you. Right? Now, Dr. Shaybani, she exposed a wide range of traditional positions about the hadith. Some people say the Prophet ﷺ was jesting with these women, right? Because this was Salat al-Eid, that the Prophet ﷺ would say something like that to women on Eid. For some people, like, no, that's not the adab of the Prophet ﷺ. He was jesting. He was being facetious. He was funning with them. Some people say no, because he took sadaqah from them. Because of course this was a wa'id. This was a wa'id. He said it, and then Bilal started collecting sadaqah from them, and the women were passing up their jewelry. Some people say no, the fact that he took sadaqah from them indicates that this was something, serious. The way that I've always understood it, and the way that I've learned it from my teachers, is that the hadith is really suggesting that a man should be prepared not to endure disrespect in his marriage, but he should have a certain thick-skinnedness, that if he were to hear something like that, he shouldn't overreact to a statement like that. But that understanding, even though it intends to create a buffer for a spouse that might, in a space of anger, make a very strong statement, it still does suggest that there is something that is prompting the extreme expression, right? Now, anecdotally, not just from, I'm talking about just me. Anyone who knows my wife knows she can make some strong statements, though. You know what I'm saying? Only because I can make stuff too. You know what I'm saying? She can make some strong statements, though. I've found that hadith to be very comforting for me, if I understand it that way. And I found it to provide a makhraj for her, so that if we do get into a contentious exchange and something is said that appears to just completely invalidate me, like, man, why would you say something like that? I can go back and say, okay, you were very upset at what happened, and I understand why. And she will say, I was very upset at what happened, but obviously I don't really think that you've never done anything for me. I really don't think you're a dirty dog. You know what I'm saying? I really don't think that you're a dirty dog, but I was a bit bothered by this or that thing. I guess I'm saying that to say, like, that allowance, that permission, that makhraj is connected to a belief in a heightened emotion, a heightened emotionality and a lower, standard of restraint in terms of speech. But I think that could be useful. I mean, I'm waiting for your critique.
I know, not a critique at all. I mean, I'm curious to know what Maryam had said. She's brilliant, so I'm sure she had something useful to say. But I think that's precisely it. I mean, in all of these hadith, I think I can't say all, but I really do think it's an invitation to think that, there are differences, and again, with that dignity in mind, is recognizing that is what the corpus wants of you. I mean, the hadith specifically, in terms of even like the naqs of aql and deen, the way that my teacher had explained it, I thought was probably the first time I'd read almost everything I could. I knew about the jesting, I knew about all the different examples, but he said something really I thought was interesting, because he said, people always read this hadith assuming that it's comparing women to men. It's like, it's not comparing women to men. It's comparing, women to women, right? Your faculty, I mean, this might not be the best words in English translation, but sort of like the emotional faculty and like the rational faculty. And he gave an example. He said, listen, that in most societies, women generally, like if you're comparing the rationality and the emotionality, yes, you're going to have higher emotionality. And the naqs is in regard to women, right? It's not men to women. And I think that's the natural assumption, is that, of course, we're being compared to men and that we're low, deficient. So then he's like, and listen, that might be sort of a general case in many communities and societies, but that doesn't mean someone like Aisha radiallahu anha, there's not exceptions to the rule, that there are plenty of women who are going to walk this earth that are going to be more more rational than men, right? So I don't know, that put it in perspective to me, because again, it goes back to like that principle that there's thousands of years before you, and for all we know, there might be thousands of years after you, and to assume that, my own experiences should define sort of like this prophetic precedent is, I mean, it's a very humbling experience to recognize that, that's not the case.
But see, my point is, and see, this is what I was trying to get at, that is still a struggle for me. My point is this: I can imagine scenarios in which this hadith of naqisat aql wa deen, and also remember, I also counsel people in the community. Mm-hmm. As crazy as that idea is. Right. So I can tell you firsthand, and I can't believe we're going here. I only got like 7 minutes left, and nobody even asked a single question. But it was just that kind of episode tonight. But I'm telling you, there are certainly domestic contexts in which that hadith can have great utility. I'm telling you this.
Oh, I don't disagree.
Right. When a man's wife is apologizing to him for something really bad that she said, and he's like, and of course, I mean, for me, the cohesion of family is a maqsad. Mm-hmm. And he's like, I can't believe she said this about my mother. My mother. Right? My mother. And I said, well, man, when the Prophet, now I don't want to offend any of our viewers, but I'm just giving you now, at least respect the fact that we're on the ground. This isn't like we're sitting at Georgetown. We're on the ground. And we may say, Akhi, man, forgive your wife, man. Maybe she was really upset by what you did or the situation, and she said something that's not reflective of how she feels about you or her mother. This hadith is an indication that a woman could get upset and say something that she doesn't even believe. Man. Just let it go, right? I've had people look at the hadith and say, Sadaqa Rasulullah alayhi wasallam Why am I even upset that she said it, man? She was probably really upset. I'm gonna go home, apologize to her. We'll make amends. The family stays together. Like I get, there's utility in that, right? Ma wajadtu minka khayran qat. You've never done anything for me, right? You're nothing. We can use a hadith like this to bring harmony back to this family. Like, bro, don't just let it go, man. She probably didn't really mean it. She was upset. Let it go. It happens, right? It happens. And look, because I'm kind of sugarcoating it. But if you say, women do this sometimes, right? Sometimes a woman might say something like that, but she doesn't really mean it, right? Now, if that family stays together, maybe something like that, there's some utility in that. But in a professional setting, the idea that you're so emotional that you say things that you don't really mean, that doesn't, I couldn't imagine, like, I can imagine myself as a woman wanting to reconcile with her husband. That hadith is helping him understand why he should forgive me. Okay, that works for me. But at my job, I'm just not sure that I would be able to see the utility of the hadith in the same way, if that makes any sense.
As a man or woman?
As both, but as a woman especially. And
I'm going to respond to the even in the home space. I think the way I would respond, I'm going to push back on you, is saying that, well, men do that too. Where's the hadith talking about men who do, right? So I think that's where the sensitivity would probably come in. It's like, okay, women do it. No one's denying that.
But that's the thing. I think, and this is kind of a bitter pill to swallow. I think in a lot of the traditional kind of moral, manuals and spiritual manuals, one of the things that men are supposed to be distinguished by is that they don't do stuff like that. That men don't, وَلِلْرِجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةٌ. One interpretation of this ayah is that even if women fulfill none of the rights of men, men fulfill all of the rights of women. And that interpretation is attributed to Ibn Abbas, that the rank that men have over women is that the relationship is not a reciprocal one. It's not like, because she does it, I can do it. It's supposed to be, even if she does say things like that, I never say things like that. Even if she does deny me hukuk, I never deny her hukuk, because there's a greater responsibility.
Yeah, in the ideal man, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, so I don't know. I guess I'm talking around my two big theses. I have two big theses, right?
That's
and
right.
I haven't teased any of these out. This is just, this is mostly just from looking around, just field work and, just talking to people and looking at people. What I think is happening is that we are adopting norms when it comes to gender that are mostly intended to open public space for women, politically, professionally. And I think that those same norms are creating a lot of domestic discord and disharmony. I think that like this one of my big ideas here is that there is a certain modality of being men and women that, as long as it's in a professional space, it works. It works. It works, and it helps to keep that playing field level. But when you take those same ideas into the domestic sphere, it's chaos. and everyone is deeply dissatisfied. And what I think is happening, and I think this is my macro soapbox critique, is that our lives are so defined by capitalism that much of our self-understanding is how I see myself vis-a-vis my wage earning activity, not how I see myself vis-a-vis my romantic life or my family life or my being a parent or my, and I think that's one of the reasons that we would, I think, struggle to identify with some of those kind of traditional gender norms. That's my thesis based on a lot of istiqra, a lot of reading, because I see people and I like just I'm just being real. Sometimes I hear people and they say things, men and women, and I'm thinking, okay, this is how you understand, let's say, like gender norms. Have you even considered how this might impact your romantic life? I mean, like your actual intimate life. Have you even considered that? I think that's like a tertiary. I think no, I don't think. I think like we're living in a time where people they don't even consider that. Like when I think about gender norms, have you considered how this might affect your romantic partnership? No, I think all of those are secondary parts of who we are. I think what I'm primarily concerned with is my career, my wage earning activity, and forms of self-actualization that occur outside of my house.
So you can't start that conversation and we have a minute left. That's not fair because there's so much to unpack there, but inshallah next time.
And next time, inshallah, look, nobody got to ask a question because it was real. It was real. And I think that, well, look, we'll have to come back and do it again, inshallah. I just want to tell you that last time I was with you and my dear brother Mu'ad and your daughter or your son?
You say that, yeah, daughter.
Your daughter at the University of Kentucky. And you said that you attended a spin class. And one of the quotes was, "You are the best gift that you can give yourself."
On point.
Yeah, whenever I'm just talking about, where we are, our moment culturally, I always use your quote, man. That joint hits, man. That joint hits. So, Jazakillah khair.
Well, yeah, I'm glad you found it useful.
Inshallah, give my best to everybody, inshallah.
Will do, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan for having me.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
And for joining us for another evening of Frames. Hope you were able to take a lot of interesting perspectives and ideas from this discussion. I know there's a lot that I'll be thinking about, inshallah. I wanted to make a correction from one of our earlier announcements. The book club will be on Wednesday, November the 29th, the last Wednesday of the month. You can go to ALIM program.org/book-club to register for the book club. This month, we will be reading Gaza Kitchen, a combination of histories and recipes and stories of the Palestinian people. Keep our brothers and sisters in Palestine and in Gaza in your du'as. Again, go to alimprogram.org/book-club to register for the book club this month. You will also find our Umrah trip that's happening this December. You'll find that information there as well. Inshallah, thank you for joining us and have a good night, inshallah.